joining us in the West, and good afternoon to participants dialing in from points east. I am David White, National Executive Director for SAG-AFTRA, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to our SAG-AFTRA and IATSE Industry Town Hall with Congressman Adam Schiff, and also with IATSE International President Matt Loeb and SAG-AFTRA President Gabrielle Carteris. Today's program is an important next step in our industry's effort to address the needs of our joint memberships during this intensely disruptive period. The past few months have been hard, really hard, and the next few months will also be challenging. But we want you to know that we are doing everything within our power to protect your interests during this time and as we move forward. As most of you know, SAG-AFTRA is in negotiations right now, and I will therefore be returning to the bargaining table before the end of today's conversation. Before I go, I do want to say a quick word about something on all of our minds, and that's about the safe return to work. We are engaged in a process that is collaborative throughout the industry, and I'm so pleased to also be saying that we're working directly with our colleagues at IATSE, the DGA, and all other unions within the industry. You will be hearing much more about that in the future. Now, a word about the structure of today's conversation. Our three terrific panelists will each have introductory remarks, followed by an exclusive Q&A session in which the presidents will ask Congressman Schiff the questions that you have submitted in advance. So let's get this ball rolling, and allow me to introduce the first of today's speakers, SAG-AFTRA President Gabrielle Carteris.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be on this panel today. I'm looking forward to hearing from Congressman Schiff. You've been a great advocate for our members, so thank you in the industry. I'm also looking forward to hearing from IATSE President Matt Loeb, who's a great partner in this challenging journey. You've been really wonderful to work with, Matt. So, good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking time to be with us today. So every day, you know, families who are sheltering in their homes for public health reasons are actually depending on the professionals in our industry. And that means actually they're depending on you. They're depending on you to deliver them news about the pandemic, to present stories, humor, drama, all these things that are helping everyone get through what is an incredibly difficult period. The irony, the true irony, is while media consumption is up, production is virtually at a standstill. And the recent CARES Act legislation helped to provide a pathway to some portion of income replacement for our members, as well as some support to the industry. And this is a meaningful start. Congressman Schiff, you know, you've played an extraordinarily important role in making that happen. You did that along with Speaker Pelosi and many others. And the Congressman has been open to our suggestions about ways to protect members. He's been in conversations with us on a regular basis and has actually been one of our greatest advocates on the Hill in regards to this particular issue. It was his dedicated advocacy and encouragement actually that resulted in the inclusion of freelance employees. Those are our members in the unemployment portion of the stimulus package. Now, I want you to know we are clear more has to be done to aid our members. Expanding and extending critical components of the CARES Act to close the mixed income loophole and protecting defined benefit pension plans. These are top priorities for us, all of us in the industry, as well as for the Congressman. Look, we were one of the first to be hit by the virus, and unfortunately, we may actually be among the last to come back, simply because we work in high numbers and very close proximity where PPE cannot always be utilized. And that's a painful reality for us. So as we focus on reopening and returning to work, we're gonna also continue to advocate on behalf of our members to encourage congressional action to protect and to do everything in our power to ensure that SAG-AFTRA and its members emerge from this massive disruption intact and ready to go, because that's what we all want and need. So I want to thank you again for joining us today. We're all excited to hear from our other speakers. So without further ado, it is my great privilege to introduce my friend and union leader, partner, International President Matt Loeb of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, otherwise known as IATSE. Matt.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle, and thank you so much, Congressman, for taking the time to be with us today. And thank you for everyone who's tuned in to watch this important event. We represent all facets of behind-the-scenes technicians and artisans in entertainment, including motion picture and television production, but also in stagecraft and in broadcast and in trade shows. The pandemic has essentially devastated our work opportunities, unemploying nearly 150,000 of our members. And we've been working closely with government and internally to provide education and relief to our members wherever possible. But no one knows how long it will go on, and we're going to need more help. It's going to be very difficult to get people to go to a movie theater or a live event unless they feel safe. And in the interim, our people will be unemployed and in need of assistance. And in motion picture production, the proximity, as Gabrielle mentioned, to the workers on a set may also make us among the last to return to work. We have people who put their hands on actors and hair and makeup and wardrobe. We have food service people. We have medics. So we have some really nuanced situations that have to be dealt with for a return to work policy. And as David mentioned in his opening remarks, we are working together with the other unions and guilds to try to make sure that we can come up with uniform safety standards that are the best, the gold standard. But what we really need now is strong leadership. And I can tell you that there's no stronger leadership than Congressman Schiff. You came out and sponsored a letter and got dozens and dozens of signatures of members of Congress to support our inclusion in the relief bill, in the CARES Act. And I know that our priorities and for future legislation have been conveyed. And I know that your response and attention to us is unmatched. So it really is encouraging, and you've taken this time to be with us today, that we have an advocate moving forward. Congressman Adam Schiff represents California's 28th Congressional District, which includes Hollywood and his hometown of Burbank. He's serving his 10th term in the House of Representatives and has been in office since 2001. He currently serves as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Congressman Adam Schiff.
Matt, thank you very much. And Gabrielle, so grateful to you both for organizing this forum today, but for all your tremendous work in representing the most wonderful and creative workers, I think, anywhere in the world. It's my great pleasure to represent so many of them in my district, the California 28th District. But I'm so grateful for the good working relationship that we have and this opportunity to talk about key issues affecting all of your members. None of us, with very few exceptions, have been through anything like this. I did read an article recently about a 107-year-old woman who survived the last pandemic and has survived COVID this time. But this is really unprecedented. And the workers that you represent have gone from almost full employment to almost no employment. And I think you're right that the challenges facing this workforce are probably as acute or more acute than any other, except those that are immediately on the front lines in our hospitals and our health clinics and our nursing homes, who are already risking their safety to take care of the rest of us. But because of the unique nature of the work, because it requires people to be in close proximity, but also because many of your members don't have traditional employment. They don't work for the same employer year after year, week after week. It was very important in the first CARES Act, and as you mentioned, I worked hard to make sure that we included a provision that would affect freelance workers and those that go from contract to contract, so they wouldn't be shut out of the unemployment compensation system. And we covered, I think, hundreds of thousands of people that are so situated. But nonetheless, as you might imagine in any legislation that we needed to enact in a hurry, there are things that are going to need to change and be improved and be more complete. And I know one of the issues we'll be talking about today are those with mixed income that get a combination of W-2 and 1099 income and who are at risk of falling between the cracks in terms of what the federal government is doing. So it's going to be very important that subsequent legislation address these issues. It's going to be important that we develop worker safety procedures and mechanisms. It's going to be vital to make sure that pensions remain healthy and solvent, that people remain attached to their health care, that they can afford when they're disassociated or lose their employment, that they have COBRA and they have access to health care such that if they have no income, that health care is paid for them. And of course, we want ubiquitous testing and treatment at no cost to individuals. So there's a lot for us to discuss today. I do want to once again, though, thank all of your members for the extraordinary work they do every day. I can't tell you how proud I am to represent so many of them. And as Gabrielle was pointing out, it's a terrible irony right now that while no industry has been more devastated than the one that your workers participate in every day or did before the pandemic, we're also so reliant on the creative work product of the industries that you represent to get us through this pandemic. So my thanks to your creative, wonderful workforce and members, and I really look forward to our discussion today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Congressman Schiff. I just want you to know we're ready to go back to work. We're going to help the country after this is done to keep going, and we're hoping we'll be helped here. I just wanted to say that, because of our time, we've actually received hundreds and hundreds of questions from members from both our unions and the industry. And so a lot of them were duplicative. So what we're going to do is actually we've combined these questions, recognizing our time constraint, but I think that they cover a lot of what most of the people are interested in hearing. We'll have further town halls down the road so we can have ongoing conversations. But for this one here today, you're speaking about mixed income. Matt and I are going to be exchanging questions from our members. The first question coming up actually deals with mixed income. That is a major pain point for our members. It says, the question here is, many SAG-AFTRA members have reached out to us about the issue where a performer qualifies for state unemployment benefits with W-2 income, and as a result, none of their independent contract work is counted in the unemployment claim. 25 to 100% of performers' income may not be counted, which will result in a lower weekly benefit amount than someone with a traditional work situation. Lisha asks, what plan is there to help the many people like me that work many jobs, both W-2 and 1099 types? Why are we falling through the cracks? And I think that's an important question for our industry. Sometimes it's difficult to understand why we do fall through the cracks. And maybe you can give us a little understanding of that and what's being done.
Certainly. And it was certainly not the intent, I think, of Congress, certainly wasn't my intent, that when we made provision for those that have non-traditional work, that work from contract to contract, do freelance work, or do some work with a traditional employer and get a W-2 and do other work as independent contractors, it was our intention that not only would they qualify for unemployment compensation, but that they would have the full benefit of their full income in determining the value of that unemployment compensation. Now, that's not the way it's being interpreted, and it may very well be necessary for us in a subsequent CARES package, and we may take one up as soon as Friday, to spell out that, no, all of this income should be considered for the purposes of the federal benefit and also for the purposes of the state benefit. And so I've organized another letter, much like I did in the original round, to make sure we covered freelancers, to say we need to solve this problem and make sure that all sources of income are included and considered, and that people that are so affected, whether it's in the entertainment industry or other industries, so the hospitality industry, trade shows, you name it, that they should get the full benefit of consideration of what their previous income had been, but even more so, canceled contracts for future income should be considered as well. That's my view. That's what we're trying to effectuate. The challenge right now is we're also trying to address a whole series of problems and shortfalls in funding for state and local government, in hazard pay for emergency workers, SNAP benefits. And so we are trying to put together this bill as soon as possible, and we are fighting to make sure this provision gets in it. Now we're not yet able to see text, but I would imagine text is going to come out within the next 24 to 48 hours. But we're going to continue push to have this included. I should say that unlike the prior CARES Act packages, where the parties came together very quickly and agreed on a package and it passed essentially on a unanimous basis, there's no expectation that's going to be the case here, which is both good and bad. It would certainly be preferable if there was already strong bipartisan agreement, we could move faster. But on the other hand, if things get left out, if we're not able to include this yet in the draft, it does mean that we have more time as we negotiate this package to make sure that things are included, whether they're in the first draft or not. But I want you to know that I'm certainly very mindful of the impact on so many people that you represent, and we'll be fighting to make sure that we fix this problem so that you can get the full unemployment compensation you should.
Thank you for that. Really appreciate that response. We're looking forward to seeing what happens. President Loeb, please.
Thank you. I have a question from our member, Brother Ken Simonson, who importantly notes that outside of work on movies and stage plays, IATSE also represents live event technicians and stagehands working the music, concert, trade show, convention, and hotel meeting industries. What can be done to help protect these workers who will most likely be the last of all people to go back to work? And more specifically, Brother Kurt Braun asks, are there plans for a continuation of the federal unemployment benefit that is scheduled to end on July of this year?
Yes, and I am deeply familiar with this problem because I have a lot of those venues in my district. Indeed, I had a conversation recently with the owner of the Troubadour, which is one of the classic music venues in Los Angeles that's been in operation for so long and given birth to great talents, people like Elton John, among others. And there's a deep concern that these venues are going to close their doors and never be able to reopen. So I'm particularly aware of this challenge facing so many, those that do live theater, those that do live concerts. And I think you're absolutely right. These venues are going to be the last to open because they're the venues like sporting events that pose the greatest risk in terms of the spread of a virus. There are two things I think we need to focus on. The first is those that are laid off, unemployed, are going to need to continue to get unemployment compensation as long as this pandemic persists. And so we're going to need to extend unemployment compensation. And I think there's every expectation that we will. But the second point I would make is I don't think that we should be relying so heavily on unemployment and unemployment compensation as the solution to this economic crisis. I would much rather we take the approach that many nations in Europe have and some in Asia have, and that is that we guarantee people's paychecks until we get through this. We keep them connected to their work, even if they can't show up for work. The advantage is they keep their health care when they get it through work. They're not suddenly thrown on the unemployment rolls of a system that has been crippled by the weight of so many, suddenly millions and millions of people being unemployed. It means that when we do recover, people don't have to look for jobs because they kept the jobs they already had. Germany has experienced what they have characterized as a dramatic increase in unemployment. They've gone from 5.1% to 5.9%. So their dramatic increase in unemployment is less than 1%. Now, why is that? You know, they have the same pandemic concerns there. It's because they're not relying on unemployment. They're keeping their people employed, but they're guaranteeing people's paychecks. That's what I think our federal government should do. It should take the weight off the unemployment system by guaranteeing paychecks. Pramila Jayapal has a bill to do this. that I'm a very strong sponsor and supporter of. And so I would like to see us less reliant on unemployment, but there are always going to be people who do need that unemployment, no matter whether we put that system in place or not. And for that reason, we're going to have to extend it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's interesting. Very interesting about Germany. The next question is from Tamina. She asks about the impact of prior penalty unemployment weeks. On her UI portal, she can see that her status is false statement penalty week with 0 benefits paid. And she states this qualification was placed on my name due to a single week overpayment that was made to me from EDD back in 2018. When notified by EDD as to the overpayment, I complied immediately with the request to pay the state for the full amount due plus an additional 30% penalty. Because of this single week overpayment in 2018, EDD has declared my current claim disqualified for the first 5 eligible weeks of the current crisis. This penalty phase has cost me a total of $4,014 so far. She asks that you strongly consider changing legislation to reform or remove the false statement penalty week secondary penalty and to petition the governor to issue an executive order forgiving all disqualifications on false statement penalty weeks for the current COVID-19 crisis.
Well, thank you for the feedback. What I would encourage you to do in the near term is, if you're a constituent of mine, reach out to my office. If you're in some other congressional district, reach out to your member of Congress. It may even be more helpful to reach out to your state representative, as this is an issue of the state employment development department, to see whether they're mandated to use this penalty or whether this is discretionary. If it's discretionary, they shouldn't be applying this during the middle of a pandemic. I think that's unconscionable. So I would work with, I would first seek out your state legislative office, see if they can intervene with EDD and find out, are they required to apply the law in such a harsh manner? If they are, then I think we would want to lobby the governor to provide extraordinary relief in times of a pandemic. But I would first try to find out whether EDD is correctly interpreting this. We have seen in other cases at the federal level, the agencies charged with implementing the legislation we passed have misinterpreted what we wanted. For example, Steve Mnuchin early said, the Treasury Department said, you couldn't get these stimulus checks unless you filed a tax return. That was not at all what Congress said in the legislation. And when members of Congress raised that issue with Mnuchin, he quickly reversed course. It's possible that if state legislators weighed in with the state governor, that the EDD likewise could change course if it is a discretionary decision on their part.
Thank you for that. Matt?
Thank you. IATSE's sister Martha Skirmerhorn comments, I work backstage in the wardrobe department. Social distancing is going to be a challenge specifically for us. We come in direct contact with actors, stagehands, and other dressers constantly during our work. Before we return to work, I would love specific practice guidelines from the IA, CDC, or a reputable source for how to handle our very unique jobs. We are raring to get back to work, but like everyone, want to be safe and not spread the virus. And I mentioned before, we have internally are trying to implement and negotiate these guidelines. That said, do you expect the next COVID-19 relief bill will require the Occupational Safety and Health Administration to issue an emergency temporary standard to protect workers?
I have to caveat this with, I haven't seen the text yet, but it is my hope and my expectation that there will be language requiring the promulgation of regulations to protect workers. We have focused of necessity on protecting those working in emergent situations right now in our hospitals, our clinics, our nursing homes, even our grocery stores. But we, I think, need to turn, as states contemplate reopening, to making sure that from industry to industry, workplace to workplace, there are proper work standards put in place to protect the health and welfare of the workers. So I do expect there will be language included in the CARES Act to try to accomplish that. And, you know, I will also, you know, take this opportunity to highlight something Dr. Fauci said today in his testimony, and that is we need to follow more generally the advice of the health experts when it comes to reopening our economy. That goes not just to specific types of workplaces, but it goes to the states themselves. Many of the states that are now reopening are doing so in violation of the president's own task force guidelines. And Fauci warned that prematurely opening in that way before those guidelines are met could result in a further spike of the virus and more sickness and death. So we need to listen to the experts here. We need to listen to the scientists and the health experts. That goes at the broadest levels, at the national level, as well as for states and cities, and as well for workplaces. We are also in Congress going to have to keep the pressure on the CDC to make sure that the guidelines that it's developing, which are more specific, are not thwarted or suppressed because the administration believes they're inconsistent with its preferred course of reopening before it's safe to do so. I think we all take the need to make sure worker safety is covered in our legislative work product and paramount if we're to be serious about reopening.
You know, this is the perfect segue into this next question, Congressman Schiff. You know, one of the major concerns as we're working, you know, we work with IATSE and, you know, other unions, as David was speaking of, and the industry-wide working with, you know, labor relations. One of the concerns, though, people want safety and they do want to come back to work. And there is a concern, SAG-AFTRA member Khalid Rivera raises an issue. It says SAG-AFTRA members might have to sign a waiver, not holding the production liable if they get sick due to COVID-19. This seems not to protect actors, actually not just actors, but crew members and people, you know, on set at all. Do you think this could happen? Is this permissible?
Well, I'm deeply concerned about it, and I'm sure that you know, one of the paramount negotiating issues for both the organizations will be to make sure that employers are not putting workers in that position. I can tell you at the congressional level, I'm deeply concerned. That's exactly what Mitch McConnell is trying to do. He is essentially holding hostage any further aid to people through unemployment compensation or aid to states to avoid bankruptcy, or aid to families that have lost their paychecks, unless he gets some broad immunity provision. And I think what he has in mind there is immunizing businesses so they can order employees to come back to work before it's safe to do so. And if employees get sick or die, then the employer is immunized, notwithstanding their failure to follow the guidance of health professionals. I don't want to see workers put in that position. And, you know, I think that part of what is hampering us right now in resolving these issues is you have the president's task force saying one thing about when it's safe to reopen. You have the president saying something completely different and egging on states to reopen in violation of his own guidelines. You have governors and mayors sometimes at odds with each other, and local health departments at odds sometimes with all of the above. So if you're going to immunize, as Mitch McConnell was, on the basis of what? On the basis of what the president would like or says is safe? On the basis of CDC guidelines we don't even get to see? Or is it the local health department, or is it the state guidelines when it may be very different in one part of the state? So the immunity question is I think, not only very complicated, but it can't be used as a rationalization for withholding further assistance to people who really need it. And I certainly don't want to see employees told that if they don't return to work when it's not safe to do so, then they're going to be fired and they're not going to be eligible for unemployment compensation.
I'm with you. I hope that happens. Matt, please.
Thank you. Brother Hale Hunt asks, as a retired stagehand from IATSE Local 33 in Burbank, I depend on the employment of the working members of my union to keep my pension plan solvent. With all of Los Angeles live performances shut down, what can Congress do to keep my pension paying the earned benefit amount I depend on? And what about Social Security?
Well, we are on pensions, and I hope this is part of the legislation. We are in discussions about having provisions that would help protect pensions both during the pandemic and after the pandemic. And I think that's absolutely essential. You know, if the airline industry can get, you know, $500 billion fund for large industry that helps them and helps other industries so that they don't go bankrupt and so they can persist. You know, what are we going to say, that the federal government doesn't have the resources to help people who've earned their pensions continue to be able to earn a pension and receive the pension that they worked hard for? I'll tell you, one of the things that I find so galling and grieve about right now is that tax cut that my colleagues in the GOP forced on the country 2 or 3 years ago was a $2.2 trillion tax cut. That's money we didn't have then. It's money that we could really use now. That would have paid for the entire first CARES Act. So, you know, we, I think, need to do a much better job husbanding the nation's resources. But we do need to make sure that we protect people's pensions. And I'm sorry, there was a second part of the question.
I just asked about Social Security.
Oh, Social Security, yes. Well, you know, we are seeing Mitch McConnell talk about cuts to Social Security and other entitlements right now as a way of offsetting the expenditures that are being made. But again, that's a non-starter for me, and I think that's a non-starter for the entire Democratic caucus. You know, surely if we have enough money to provide large tax cuts to corporations and wealthy families, we can afford to provide Social Security to our seniors.
Great, thank you for that. Well, we have another participant who asks, is there talk about having mortgage rates be in line with historical norms of 1% above the 10-year bond, which now stands at 0.75% or 75%? Rates should be 1.75%. Homeowners could then take cash out of their homes for expenses without increasing their mortgage payment. The government is only forbearing mortgages, which is zero help insofar. How are people going to pay 3 months of payments in one lump sum when they are not working?
Yeah. Well, this is a very important question, and really it carries on through the entire chain in terms of housing, because you've got people that are not able to pay their mortgages right now. And as you say, yes, they're protected if they're in a federally backed mortgage from eviction or from foreclosure. And their payments they may have suspended, but that doesn't let them off the hook. Ultimately, those amounts are going to have to be repaid. And if the requirement is to repay them too suddenly, then they may be foreclosed upon in the future. And we don't want this pandemic to be followed by another wave of foreclosures. The same is true for renters. You know, we put in provisions in the last CARES Act that said, if you're a renter in a building that's covered by a federal mortgage, you can't be evicted, a federally backed mortgage. Likewise, many states are putting in place those kind of requirements. But those are suspensions potentially of rent payments for those that can't make them because of the pandemic. That rent check is still going to come due, and we don't want a wave of evictions to follow this either. So we're going to have to figure out some long-term answers. Now, the government has not in the past set mortgage rates, and there's a lot to think about before we would embark on that kind of an idea. But we're going to have to make provision for some capacity for people to be able to pay their mortgage or have mortgage payments forgiven or rent payments forgiven. We're going to have to figure this out, because we, even before this crisis, had an appalling number of homeless people around the country, an epidemic of homelessness. And we certainly don't want to see this pandemic lead to another round of foreclosure, eviction, and homelessness.
For sure. Matt?
Thank you. IATSE brother Darren Graves points out, another topic that we will all be facing very soon is medical coverage premiums. Although our union has paid our premiums until July, without us returning to work anytime soon, our premiums are sure to skyrocket. With no money coming from our contributing employers or employees to subsidize the cost of these premiums, it will soon be too expensive for anyone to afford. We really need to push our medical coverage to be paid until the end of the year. Can you comment on your efforts to ensure 100% federal subsidy of COBRA to keep our members on their health care plan and extending eligibility until they can safely return to work?
Yes, I'm co-sponsoring legislation to do that, to provide 100% federal backup support for COBRA right now, so people can continue to keep their coverage. I don't know whether the precise bill that I'm co-sponsoring will be a part of the CARES Act bill that we take up later this week or next week, or whether it'll be a different provision. I know there will be a substantial amount, though, in the next CARES Act of federal funding to help defray the cost of COBRA. And I think those should be covered so that no one is forced out of their health care because they lost their job. You know, again, though, getting back to a point I was making earlier, it's much more cost effective and better, I think, for everyone to keep people employed and keep them getting their health care through their employment rather than have to pay for their COBRA and unemployment compensation. It's less costly to the federal government, and it's better for the worker to retain their job and retain their benefits. So it's once again why I really think, and I'm hoping that we have a mechanism in this bill to guarantee people's paychecks and to preserve that work relationship. The Pramila Jayapal bill that I mentioned earlier would prevent about 36 million people from losing their income. There are other proposals that would use the employee retention tax credit as a way of incentivizing employers to keep on their employees. If that's generous enough, that may be an alternate route to this. But one way or another, we need to make sure, whether it's through COBRA or continued employment, that people retain their health care, and people that didn't have health care to begin with can get health care right now. One of the things that I hope will come out of this pandemic is it is revealing with all the greatest urgency and to the point of mortality, so many of the disparities and inequities in our society, in access to healthcare, in access to capital, in any number of ways. And I hope that as we think about both responding in real time, but building back when this is over, that we build back better. So that we really do move to universal health care, so that we do address these inequities that are making minority communities right now so both susceptible to spread of the virus, but also increasing the mortality rates through the roof. The African-American population, for example, is so disproportionately bearing the burden of this virus, and the fatalities are so disproportionately African-American. We need to address that in real time, but we also need to address the fundamental inequities in our healthcare system and access to healthcare that are reflected in these mortality numbers.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So another question, they'll just keep coming. You're doing a great job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
SAG-AFTRA member Gino Cronali, I'm sorry, Gino, if I said your name incorrectly, asks, would you consider cutting government student loan interest rates in half or to 0% until 2025? Borrowers can continue to make principal payments, but the occurring interest of 6% makes paying off a loan very difficult, especially now when the job market is sparse due to COVID-19.
You know, I believe that we have cut federal student interest to 0 and suspended payments, I think, up until September. The question is, what happens after that? So many recent graduates, and we've got one in our family who just graduated from college, lost her job before she started it on her first day. And that's a story, of course, being told all around the country. And so we're going to have to make provision for those that are going to be struggling to find work for quite some time, not to have an even greater burden of student debt. And so I think we're going to certainly need to go beyond what we've done already to address this problem. Frankly, this was a huge issue even before the pandemic, but the pandemic is making it, like so many other things, even worse. So my expectation is that we're going to need to go beyond what we've done already, both in terms of interest rates on student loans, suspension of loans, to look at forgiveness of loans or portions of loans. I think all of those issues are on the table as we figure out what's going to be needed for the next generation to make sure they're not hobbled coming out of the starting gate.
Thank you. Matt?
So we have 322 distinct local unions throughout the United States, and those locals employ thousands of Americans, and the labor organizations face the same problems that other small businesses face in paying staff, rent, mortgage, and utilities. The local union staff are providing vital education and assistance to members during the crisis, helping them connect to needed federal, state, local, and charitable coronavirus assistance programs, and working to promote on-the-job health and safety for those still working. Yet labor organizations organized as 501c5s are ineligible for the federal economic support provided in the Paycheck Protection Program. Will Congress expand eligibility to this critical economic relief?
We certainly should, and I've been very supportive of efforts to do exactly that. I would hope that in the bill we take up this week or next, that we have expanded that program such that people in organized labor can use it. You can easily, I think, trace the decline, frankly, of the middle class and the growing disparity in wealth in this country to attacks on organized labor and attacks on collective bargaining. And the last thing we want to do right now is make those problems even worse, come out of this pandemic in an even worse position in terms of working people and this yawning gap between rich and poor. You know, I think labor unions right now are playing a vital role in getting information out to their workers about how to stay healthy, about the status of their industries, about workers' safety when they go back to work. I can't imagine a more important time for workers to be represented right now and have the ability to collectively bargain and have someone that can offset the enormous power and leverage of some of these large employers. So absolutely, you should be covered. And I would hope and expect that that will be part of what we put forward in the House. You know, I think you can expect there's going to be opposition from the other party, which is, as well as the president, you know, made it very much a part of their strategic objective to cripple the labor movement. And so we're going to have to use the leverage that we have to press until we succeed on this issue.
Well, I want to say our workers appreciate that you're going to press on this issue for sure. I want to ask, you know, you started off actually this conversation today regarding how, you know, protocols that are being put forth and that we need to pay attention to it, that, you know, as you said, Fauci said, there's a path here. We're just not sure what it looks like, how long it's going to go. That being said, with everything, since this is a question that came out to me, since this is not going to let up for a while, can we extend the $600 federal part of the unemployment beyond the 3 months originally approved? This was from Rudy Van Zyl.
And the short answer is yes. I think there is going to be an extension of unemployment. I think it's going to be absolutely necessary. And one of the things that many of us have been urging, myself included, that we include in the next CARES package is a stabilizing mechanism such that Congress doesn't need to step in every few weeks or every week to extend programs because the conditions have persisted. And so if we put in place triggers that say, for example, that enhanced benefit will continue as long as unemployment is above 7%, then you can have some ability to plan and feel some security of knowing, okay, as long as the unemployment picture is this bad, I will be able to count on unemployment compensation to feed my family. It's better for the economy. It's obviously better for families to be able to have that predictability. So many of us are urging that we put stabilizers in, not just for unemployment compensation, but for PPP or other programs, so that they're in force until times improve. That would also go, by the way, for what I've been proposing and Pramila Jayapal has been proposing in terms of the federal government guaranteeing paychecks, that we would do so until unemployment drops below a certain level.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Matt, do you have another question?
I didn't have another question in front of me, but there are more if we need them.
Great. I think, well, we have a few minutes. I do have one here that I could read. And then I actually, if there's something that comes up for you, Matt, we can do one more each.
Sure.
And then I have one last question and we can, I think, get close to wrapping it up. But David Hammett from IATSE, many entertainment industry workers are not entitled to paid sick leave. It has never been more important for the health and safety of everyone in the workplace that we feel free to call in sick without loss of income. Will you consider sponsoring a congressional bill making it mandatory for employers with 20 or more employees to provide a minimum number of paid sick days for their employees?
I would certainly, I'd have to look at that particular proposal, but I would certainly support paid sick leave, especially at a time of a pandemic. I mean, the last thing you want right now is for workers to feel they have to go back to work sick. That, you know, you couldn't have a policy more antithetical, not only to people's health, but to the health of the economy. And here's the thing, that those that, you know, are trying to make this dichotomy between going back to work or protecting our health, you can't do one without the other. There's going to be no economic recovery without the recovery of our health, without effective treatments, and ultimately without a vaccine. You can have some reopening, and we will, but if the reopening is done in advance of what healthcare experts say, it's going to lead to more sickness, more death, and ultimately more closures. When you look back at the last pandemic 100 years ago, one thing that we find is that those cities that maintain their protections the longest ended up recovering the fastest. Now that might seem counterintuitive because you think, well, cities that opened earlier would get a head start on their economic recovery. No, cities that opened earlier got sicker and had more death, and it delayed their economic recovery. So you can say we're open for business in a state before you're ready, but are people going to go out to eat, or people going to go to the theater or a gym or a beauty parlor if they think they may get sick and die? That's simply not a viable answer. There are good answers and good strategies. We need testing in place. It needs to be much broader than what we have. We need a tracing mechanism. If you have those things in place, if you have testing in place, if you have treatment in place, if you have tracing in place, if you have an ability to isolate in place, what it means is you can start reopening, and where the virus emerges, you can quickly identify where it is and shut it down by isolating people that have been exposed to it through testing and tracing. If you open before you have that capacity, then you don't know where the virus is until suddenly large number of people are getting sick. And then you're forced to close everything all over again. When you look at some of the Asian countries that have done this well, you know, the Singapores, the South Koreas, elsewhere, they have had measured reopenings, and sometimes when they do, they've had a resurgence, but they've been able to tamp it down. They're doing what the United States should have done. And it really is a blight that the most technologically sophisticated, with the best healthcare experts in the world, has had among the worst results in the world, with more infection and more death than the rest of the world. Let's not make this problem worse than it already is.
Thank you. Matt, were you able to find one? Because I can move on to another question if you...
Yes, of course. And we've spoken a lot about our sort of legislative and policy goals during this call today. And two things. One is, what sort of leverage will we have against the right that's trying to load up, the CARES Act and everything else to not just to hurt labor, but to get other agenda items in place that they've been fighting for and looking for, and they're trying to sort of slip into this process. And also, what can we do? Because we believe that we are a loud and creative and potent voice in the industry, but also in the labor movement to support you and your colleagues in these efforts on our behalf.
Well, thank you for the question. The leverage that we have is the leverage of public opinion. Our speaker likes to say, public opinion, you can do everything with it, you can do nothing against it. The reality is that the hard right positions are deeply unpopular. For the administration right now to be trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act and cause millions more to lose their health care couldn't be more tone deaf to the circumstances. Efforts to cut Social Security right now couldn't be more tone deaf to the circumstances. And as you say, these agendas cutting Social Security, tort reform, they're around for my conservative colleagues in good times, bad times, and in different times. But I think it's very difficult and going to be very difficult for my colleagues in the GOP to vote against help for states who are employing these first responders. It's going to be hard to vote against hazard pay for people working in our hospitals. It's going to be hard to vote against helping people and their pensions. It's going to be hard to vote against additional testing and developing a tracing capability. It's going to be hard to vote to cut people off from unemployment compensation when you have unemployment at levels not seen since the Great Depression. So these are deeply unpopular positions that Mitch McConnell is championing right now. I've been urging that we actually take up many of these things, not just in one single package, but individually, and require people to go on record. Do they support helping people during this pandemic or don't they? And don't hide behind, some broad tort reform agenda. Do you want to provide support for hospitals right now in states and cities, or don't you? And so the leverage we have is the leverage of public opinion and need, and the leverage of good science and people being concerned about their health. Quite overwhelmingly, people are afraid not that we're waiting too long to open, but that we're opening against the advice of the health experts. In terms of what your organizations can do, I think member education, as always, is deeply important. Getting out good information about what your members can do to stay safe and healthy, what they can do to access benefits, how they can weigh in with Congress when we're considering legislation to make sure that it's not just people like myself who represent large numbers of people that work in these industries, but others around the country too that need to know that this affects other industries too. There are other industries where people have W-2s and they have contract work, and it affects their constituents as well. This was why, in part why we were successful in protecting freelancers in the first bill, is that it protected a lot of freelancers in a variety of different industries. So broadening the coalition in Congress that is aware of how members are impacted by, this multiple sources of income, for example, is really important.
Thank you for that.
Yes, thank you so much. I want to say, just before we started the panel, actually before we saw you this morning, we had heard that the House bill came out. We want to say thank you, Nancy Pelosi, and to all of you who did that. We don't know what's in the House bill, and I'm not sure if you're able to right now, because we couldn't go through all of it yet, but we wanted to know if you could touch base on some of the things that we're going to see in that House bill. There's hope of pension and, such that you heard earlier. Could you just kind of do a little overall for us on that?
I wish I could. I'm told that the bill is ready, but as far as I can tell, none of us have been able to see it, or if we have, maybe during the course of this call. So I don't know the specifics. I do know of a number of the general priorities in the bill, and certainly chief among them, we're helping the states right now weather this crisis, and helping the cities, and helping the first responders, helping those that are working, essential workers in our hospitals, addressing the cataclysm going on in nursing homes, providing for the requirement of worker safety standards. And my understanding is there will be pension language as well, although I don't know what that language says yet. And we are working hard to make sure that this issue of multiple forms of income is covered, but I don't have confirmation that that's included yet. So still some very big questions unanswered. Also, what I've been urging in terms of this payroll guarantee or paycheck guarantee, I think there will be some form of that. It may be in the form of a employee retention tax credit. The question is, though, how big and how broad is the draft, and how many millions will it cover or not cover? And those, obviously, those questions are deeply significant in their impacts.
Thank you. I know it's 1,800 pages. I don't know how come you just don't know it right. I'm teasing you off the top of your head. Thank you for that. I'm excited, as well as everybody here is, to hear it. You talked a little bit just before, voting to get certain things done, and people have been writing in. One of the questions that came was, elections in November. A lot of people are curious how that's going to be handled. Can we ensure people are going to be able to go out and vote?
I think this is absolutely imperative. Even as we focus on the health of our economy and the health of our people, we need to focus on the health of our democracy. And I think what happened in Wisconsin was an abomination, that people were forced basically to choose their health or their franchise. We don't want to put people in a position like that in November. As Fauci testified today, there's every reason to expect that this virus is either going to be back in the fall and winter, or that it will have never left us between now and then. And so this health issue is going to be with us. I think, frankly, every state should follow the example that California is, where every Californian is going to get a postage paid, at least I hope it's postage paid, a ballot so they can vote by mail. And Congress ought to help defray the costs of that. People should have, I hope, the ability to go to a polling place, a voting station safely, if safety allows that. But they should also all have ready access to vote by mail or vote at home. There is opposition to that. We hear it from the president. The president did say, and this was one of those illustrations of saying the secret thing out loud, that he felt if it were easier for Americans to vote, that no Republican could get elected. Now, I don't know if that's true, but if that's true, it's a good reason to change their anti-worker and divisive platform. It's not a good reason to disenfranchise people from voting. So I would hope that in the package being released today, there is also strong provision for vote by mail and funding to back that up.
Well, this is one of the things when Matt asked the question, so I would urge everybody who's here with us, as a nonpartisan, just the idea in terms of safety and being able to make sure our voices are heard as a country, I write to your local, representatives and, to the government to say, please allow us the ability to vote by mail. We want to make sure our voices are heard. And again, it's not as a partisan statement, but it's just as an American citizen. And that is a way that we can use our voices. So I appreciate that. And Matt, before we go, I was hoping if you had anything you wanted to close with, please do.
I really just, I would like to thank you, Gabrielle, and the work that you did putting this together. I want to thank the folks who came and who asked the questions to learn. And I really just want to express my deep thanks to the Congressman for what you have been doing on behalf of working people, on behalf of our union and the entertainment unions and the industry at large, and what you've been doing for the people of this country. It's crucial, and we need this leadership now, and you've shown that, and so I thank you.
Indeed. Before we leave, Congressman Schiff, did you want to end with anything?
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Gabrielle. Gabrielle, I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to talk with both of you, and I'm grateful for all your advocacy for your members. Just to end on an optimistic note, we are going to get through this. I think that we have to be realistic about the challenges ahead. I think we're likely to see waves and wavelets of this virus for some time. But if we can observe good practice and listen to the healthcare experts, what we're really able to do is we're able to buy time for the development of treatments and ultimately for the development of a vaccine. None of us knows how this virus is going to affect any one of us. It's a crapshoot. Even children are having now serious medical impacts from this virus. And you've got adults with no pre-existing conditions, some of whom are great athletes who are nonetheless deeply stricken by this. So there's so much we don't know about the virus, but I have every confidence that we will develop effective treatments that will reduce these impacts and reduce the casualties until we have a vaccine. And so if we can maintain good health practices, we can avoid a lot of unnecessary suffering and loss of life. So that needs to be our mission. And in the meantime, we need to help people get by. And we're a rich enough country to be able to do that. We need to look out for those who are the most vulnerable among us. And finally, we need to think about how do we build back a better country as we have after other major cataclysms like the Great Depression and World War II. How do we build back a better, stronger, and more just society?
Thank you for that. I want to echo Matt. First of all, so wonderful to always be with you and work with you and to be with you, Congressman Schiff. I want to echo what Matt said. We appreciate your diligence. We appreciate your being out there fighting the good fight. You actually give voice to us at a time where it will take all of us to make a difference. And we appreciate you and all you do. We are here to support you. Please let us know in any way how we can do that. I thank everybody for joining us. I think this was an incredibly informative conversation for us to have. Please, for those of you who are watching, sign up to the SAG-AFTRA YouTube site. This way you can get notices for any future programs that we have. It will be all of us together that will rise. And we will do that because that is what we do. And thank you so much for being here and for your time.
Thank you.